Hello, this is George Lees talking to John Patterson in East Sussex about the vital issue of accuracy when you record your details as a director in the official listings in the UK. We've talked a lot about massive fraud and the emptying of the UK Treasury involving people of the magnitude of Klaus Moser, the chief statistician. We talked last night about Boateng, who's been head of the Treasury. He's been involved as head of the Republic of South Africa for 5 or 6 years. He's held office in the UK Cabinet as the first black man to be in the Cabinet. Like the Lady Abbott, who is also a personal contact of mine, she was the first black MP in the female gender. The gender is unimportant. When they get into the business register, it's very, very difficult to find out who the directors are, because they're only obligated to give names and numbers and addresses. They are not intimidated by telling lies, and they are allowed to register several overlapping or concomitant director IDs with different birth dates and with different middle names, and it is impossible to track down what the identity is of the person that you're trying to investigate. When you go to the House of Commons register and conflicts of interest pages, they used to be obligated to give all of their current directorships, and no longer do they do that. They claim their expenses on handwritten sheets now that can be hundreds of pages long. I remember having a look at Alan Beath's, who's a local MP near to me. Is relatively close to retirement now, but he had a very, very large expenses claim, and it was all written down in little scribble books. And very often they use a family member as the secretary, and all of that is done through the parliamentary office. I want to talk about my MP because he is involved in several things that we've already portrayed, and one of the things that he's involved in is the Westminster Foundation for Democracy Limited. And I've got his name here, and his address for this registration is Michael Kevin Moore. Okay, he lives, or his registered address is Wellsbury Cottage, Innerleithen, Peeblesshire, EH 44 6HR. Now that is almost certainly Michael Moore, the MP, because it's in his constituency, and this is the same ID that Gordon Bowden highlighted for us. His director number on that one is 908 327 980. I'm now going to look again at the companies that he runs, and the only one that he has, which is what Gordon and I talked about, is the Westminster Foundation for Democracy Limited. Now if you look at the subsidiaries and other people that work within that organisation and down below, it's linked to JP Morgan and George Soros, and they've got, I think it's using a company called Alnerley as one of their secretarial services. They've got 3,000 Ponzi shelves, and this is the Westminster Foundation for Democracy Limited. Now I've been able, thanks to Gordon, in identifying this one directorship for this very important person. He's been on the cabinet for several years now. He's had to step down for several reasons recently, and he's now in the process of winning the referendum in Scotland and being able to crow about his achievements in, keeping the UK together, at the same time as he perpetually demonises Islam and the terror threat from other people. These are financial terrorists, as you will find out in due course, but it is very, very difficult to prove anything definitively, because when you go through passport control or enter onto a plane as just a travelling citizen, you have to show a definitive ID that has to be approved by the government and our police force and the passport issuing authorities. It's very rigid and it has to be policed, and when you go into places like America, you sometimes have to give your fingerprints, sometimes you get strip searched, sometimes things get taken from you just as you head out for your holidays, if it's taboo. Sometimes they take your socks and shoes off. In the business registry, you can tell a crock of lies. You don't even have to show a passport or a birth certificate. And that allows directors who are corrupted to register several times over. And let me just speculate about Michael Moore, my MP. The next site I'm going to look at on Company Check is also for Michael Moore. This time the director number is 911443671. Now, I should have looked at the birth date the last time, because the birth date for Michael Ellis Moore is 1956. I'll just go back and have a wee look for Michael Kevin Moore. The birth date for Michael Kevin is 1965. So Gordon has said that this is Michael Moore, and it looks just like Michael Moore. Innerleithen, Peeblesshire, EH 44 6HR. I'm not sure that the last time we went here that he was as bold and brilliant to declare that he was actually in the constituency, but let's now have a look. So that's 1965 he was born, for that one official registration. And in this one, where he's Michael Ellis, or the person is Michael Ellis, they were born in 1956. This time the director ID is 911443671. The registered address is DP World, Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Okay? The directorships are listed in summary. 0 appointments at 0 active companies, because this person is under scrutiny and they've bailed out of 86. That's 86 resigned appointments. 1 appointment at 1 dissolved company. And when you look at what they do, and when you look at what the companies are, this is a shipping, ferry, cruiser boats and mail infrastructure companies. So they've got 80 plus companies. P&O Scottish Ferries, P&O Properties International Limited, P&O Scottish Ferries Limited, Townsend Ferries and Shipping Limited, Old Course Golf and Country Club Limited. Now that is associated with Dubai because they've got golf courses there and very important prominent tournaments. But the Old Course is in Scotland, and Michael Moore, we don't know whether or not this is Michael Ellis Moore, because they're allowed to tell you what they like on the business register. But when they bail out, and when you see that their Facebook friends, who are your friends as well, still work in the shipping sector, then you begin to smell a rat. When you then double that up with the fact that the Borders College, which is in Galashiels and a subsidiary of Heriot Watt where I got my first degree, then you think, oh, that is a shocking coincidence that the Borders College also has a huge base in Dubai. And that, one presumes, is why, if this were Michael Moore, the former cabinet member, who's guilty of student theft projects despite his pre-electoral pledges in 2010 that now none of the liberal Democrats would ever impose fees on British students. They upped the fees to £9,000 a year within a few months of that statement, and that is why he was picked to be one of the leaders of the student loans company, along with who's the man that Gordon hits on, head of the DTI, John? Vince Cable. Okay?
Yeah.
Vince Cable and Michael Moore, not necessarily Michael Ellis Moore. No one's allowed to know whether this is Michael Moore, the prominent politician, despite the coincidences that his Facebook friends work in the shipping sector. Some of my students came to me in New Zealand on the boats that they run, and their parents work in this network. Okay? It is deeply entwined. And when you look at the links to London, it's through that woman, Miss Scott, that we talked about yesterday.
Yep.
And they are linked into the Abbotsford Trust and the Walter Scott Foundations and all of the notorious local borders networks, alias local borders mafias, involving the dukes and duchesses that own the river, the dukes and duchesses that sent the exiles into the Commonwealth for stealing loaves of bread. Yeah? So I'm just trying to point out that if Michael Moore were a really robust parliamentary representative for me, he would allow me to meet him and discuss these issues. He locks me out of his office. Okay? And all we need to do is find some politicians who are aware that the Treasury is empty because of fraud like this. I'm not saying that this is Michael Moore. There is no way that any individual in the UK can declare that this is Michael Moore, the MP. But the circumstantial evidence is huge, and the links to the Borders College and those other networks through the London mafias associated with Walter Scott, and we've talked a lot about returning troops and what Walter Scott's foundation does to them.
Yes.
Yeah, and they will stop at nothing. But there are no rules in the vitally important registration of the business sector. So I've said my piece on Michael Moore, and if this were to be applied, all you need to do is to have a birth certificate and a photo of the registered director, and when they get their cheque, you get a photo of the person that's getting rewarded for it. But if you want that type of information, you have to pay for it. So everything is behind locked doors and beyond boundaries that no citizen, even if he's curious about the welfare of the country and the welfare of British students who are paying heavily for Michael Moore's sins and those false promises that he made, then we could know that Michael Moore was relatively innocent, and that the only fraud that he's participated in is, several years ago, I believe that he dropped out of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy around 2004 or some such. It was well back in time. He's no longer on the board of anything, and the person that's bailed out of Dubai and the registration with these shipping magnates is Michael Ellis Moore, but there's no way that anyone can associate that with the public figure that is my MP. Can you see the injustice and how easy it would be to fix that bureaucratically? Very little paperwork. The same passport that British citizens need to take to their solicitors if they want to get a divorce, for fear that they're laundering pensions or some such, or components of a salary out of the country or out of the way of the judiciary, all of whom use the same laundering tools that Gordon Bowden and I describe. The whole of the Scottish judiciary and the law enforcement system are embroiled in networks of fraud, and the advisors to the Law Society and Mr. Salmond, who resigned yesterday, are famous people. They've got publications in the sector where they issue advice. John Lamont, my other representative at Holyrood, is also an advisor. He's a former solicitor with Brodie's and a German company that I cannot remember, but he's not got the courage to list himself as a director. He may not be a director. He's a clever man. He knows that we are relentlessly tracking them down, and he is very reluctant to give up his secrets like Michael Moore. And there are over 80 resignations for Michael Moore. You can see how nice a little earner it would be to have 80 registrations in the P&O and the massive sector that is the British India Steam Navigation Company Limited. 80 plus registered directorships where you cannot prove or track down the director who is named in the business registry. And that should be an obligation for every MP, if it is an MP, to declare it in their conflict of interest. So on that basis, Michael Moore is not Michael Ellis Moore, but I very much doubt it. But he won't let me meet him to discuss it, but I still know who the names of those Facebook friends of his are that work in this sector, and I know the names of my own student who went with me to New Zealand using these methods, and his belongings came across on boats like this, like my family belongings, when we went in both directions. Now, we wanted to talk, last night we uncovered someone in a long listing of people that were linked to Lord Paul Boateng, and we talked for ages about Paul Boateng, but tonight we're just going to talk about one of the people that were interlocked to him, and that is a man called Neil Lyndon Mark Blair. Now, when I discovered him on Dr. Jones's listings last night, linked to Boateng, I did not really appreciate the magnitude of my discovery, because I just said to John, we've got a Neil Lyndon Mark Blair. That could be a relative of Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister. What did you then say, John?
Well, actually, what happened, George, I got confused with Lyndon and Linton. And Anthony Charles Linton Blair. He was arrested for importuning in public toilets, but the name he gave was Charles Linton.
Yeah, and that led you to believe that this was probably the same man.
Yes.
And then when we had a look this evening, we got a little bit despondent because we could not really find very much on him. But you had just looked up Neil Blair, you'd forgotten to insert those middle names. But when we did insert the ones that we found last night, we find that he's registered at 89 New Bond Street, very posh part of London. If you're playing Monopoly, you have to pay a lot of money to buy property there. His company number is 909472810, and he's got a list of companies which he's a director for, which makes us fairly sure that this is the former Prime Minister because of the power base of his fellow directors. I'm just going to click them on and open them up in summary. Have you got the summary page open, John, or have you got the director page open for Neil Lyndon Mark Blair?
I've got yes, Neil Lyndon Mark Blair, 9094728810.
Yeah, okay. So he holds 18 appointments at 18 active companies,
yeah,
has resigned from 17 and held 11 appointments at 8 dissolved companies. Neil began their first appointment at the age of 25. Now, the fly in the ointment here is, as often, the birth date does not seem to tally with what you find in Wikipedia. But because it's not a crime, they can do it again and again. They can change their birth date, they can change their middle initials, they can change the director ID, or just play around with the address, and then you've got them secure and safe in another undisclosed place where you have to work really hard to find out what else they're involved in as a mafia operation. Okay, so Neil holds a current appointment equals 8 million with a combined assets value of 125 million and liabilities of 5.6 million. Roles associated with Neil Blair within the recorded business include company secretary, director, LLP, designated member, LLP member. So this is a busy bee if it really is the former Prime Minister, and the former Prime Minister has many functionaries that can help him with those tasks. But the reason that John and I got excited because we were slightly inaccurate last night when we said it was Neil Linton Mark Blair. What I was actually saying with my bizarre Scottish accent was Neil Lyndon, Lyndon. Now, in the incident in the toilet, he told the police that he was Linton Mark. Is that correct?
Charles Linton.
Yeah, Charles Linton.
And he was arrested for importuning in public toilets.
Okay. So this is a power broker because we can tell from the list of companies that he's big. Let me read them. 8 Maresfield Gardens Limited, Warner Brothers Productions Limited, The Bountiful Company Limited, Harry Potter Limited, Frightmares Productions Limited, Elixir Films Limited, Asimov Limited, Little Blair Productions LLP, Create More Limited, The Collections Agency Limited, Christopher Little Literary Agency LLP, The Blair Partnership LLP, The Cuckoo's Calling Limited, Harry Potter Theatrical Productions Limited, J.K. Rowling Website Limited, Lumos Foundation, Bridge Productions Limited, Pottermore Limited, Neil Blair Limited, UK Friends of the Abraham Fund Initiatives, Cormoran Strike Limited, and then we get into big fraud now that we recognise because it's been described by me in the massive crimes that Michael Grade and his consortia engage in, and that takes you into Tel Aviv and into the Havens. Ingenious Film Partners LLP, Ingenious Games LLP, we'll have to have a look at that, I've never heard of that one before. Inside Track 3 LLP, Eton 32 Management Limited. Now Eton, I think, is probably the public school where most British Prime Ministers have attended.
And that 32 is an interesting number, George.
Just because of the Masonic, what does it mean?
Well, it's a high-level Freemason number.
Okay.
32 degree.
Is Eton a primary school?
No, Eton's it's a public school.
So they go all the way till they're adults. You know, they're 18-year-old when they come out. Because I'm pretty certain that Tony Blair went to Fettes.
Okay.
Yeah, and he went to Fettes with Bill Gamble, and you know all about that. And he's a very close friend of Bush, as is Gamble. You know, they've been registered in the same businesses together, and Gamble has now resigned as head of Cairn because of the pressure that Gordon Bowden has put him under. Okay, and Phoenix Film Partners LLP, they're massive Ponzi schemes to launder money out of the country. They engage celebrities like the football, you know, celebrities, the football manager for the English team, Manchester.
Look at Sir David Beckham.
Yeah, they're all on it. And when we looked at Grade's versions of these, you see that there are, you know, 600 and odd directors, and each one of them is almost permanently on the board, and they can also engage 600 subsidiaries. The numbers are massive when you look at what we described in those videos about Grade the other night. That's Lord Michael Grade of where is it, up on the Norfolk coast somewhere? Yarmouth. Okay, then you've got Bronte Film and Television Limited, Ingenious Film Partners 2 LLP, Robert Galbraith Limited. Okay, so this is a power broker. And can you remember how Tony Blair, when he was in office, they used to have huge celebrity parties in 10 Downing Street? Yeah. And all of that, and you talked about him meeting Murdoch several times. A lot of these things mean that they are intertwined with the Red Nose Day scams, with the Chipping Norton sets, and the Prime Minister's drinking club. J.K. Rowling now lives on the Firth of Forth at a place called, it's in the fascist film about Miss Jean Brodie, Cramond. Have you heard of Cramond?
Yeah, yeah.
And so what you're talking about there is buildings that used to be owned by the Balfours, and they then became buildings
This is the Balfours from the Balfour Declaration.
Yeah, the same Balfours as the farm that I was born onto.
Yeah.
And that was Arthur Balfour that owned that estate that's just along the road from me. And I was literally born on their farm.
That's incredible.
And just being listed as a director is not necessarily a crime. But when you cannot find out whether or not these are actually politicians, because they fall, if this is Tony Blair, and it's likely to be a member of his family, as we'll see from what we look at, if we look for the overlapping directors that he has on this listing, which we'll do in a few minutes. But you can see that these are the same circles that the Conservative and the Lib Dem leaders swim in, and they drink in, and they plot in to, you know, come up with the things that Rebecca Brooks, is in the Chipping Norton set, has a massive holding of directorships, and they're involved in all sorts of charitable scams, phone company scams, and when the phone companies get involved in hacking, the people that become the advisors to the Prime Ministers are always acquitted of the crimes, apart from Coulson, who took a token sentence like Mubarak in Egypt. Yeah, but the elected democratic official in Egypt is still missing. You know, President Morsi. And that's how pathetic this world is. It's not really pathetic, it is vicious and ruthless and greedy. So let's just quickly, before we stop, have a wee look at what we find if we click on Neil Linden Mark Blair's interlocking directors on the boards of those other companies. And it was John who discovered this earlier this evening. What we find when we look at the interlocking directors for Neil Linden Mark Blair is a number of Blairs on the list. Now we have no idea whether they are his children or his nephews and nieces or just his in-laws, but let me reel some of them off. If any of you drink in the Chipping Norton set or at 10 Downing Street occasionally, maybe you could clarify whether these are Tony's relatives, because there's no other way that we can prove the identity of the people on the director listing. It's tremendously important to prevent the fraud that you can definitively say who the public figures are that run the country, and that they are not abusing the country by stealing from the Treasury, as we've described in recent months. Who's the man that brutalises Iraq? Who's the Kurd, John?
Zahawi.
Zahawi, yeah, he runs his companies from the House of Commons, and Lord Klaus Moser runs his from the House of Lords. Leaders of the government for decades. But let's just talk about the overlaps. Elixir Films, we have a Jonathan Adam Saul Blair, along with Neil Linden Mark. In Hoco, we have a Mr. Dennis Blair. Asimov, we have Deborah Jane Blair, Miss Deborah Jane Blair. There's a Clifford. You know the scandals about Max Clifford, John?
Yes, he's an agent.
Well, there's a Michael Anthony Clifford. Could be one of the baby boys. His company looks quite vicious. Previous directors and secretaries, 1,570 resigned of a total of 1,806. Pump and dump.
Max Clifford was paid £1 million to stop the news getting out, which led to the death of Greg Hallett. That the fact that the monarchy was fake. I
don't really want to speculate on that, and £1 million is chicken feed in the frauds that we're talking about here. Yeah. And this is not Max Clifford, but it could be. That's the whole point of making this video, is that they can tell whatever lies they want to falsify an ID and to repeatedly take directorial pay for that without any insight from the lay public or without any need to declare their true identities, even in the Parliamentary Register of Conflicts of Interest. But when you understand that each one of these non-executive directors could be taking salaries that are six-figure sums for every directorship that they own, then you understand why they have the citizens in austerity, why they brutalise innocent countries to take the attention off their crimes. So let's just keep going down. Mr. Christopher John Little, Little Blair Productions Limited, Eric Hartley Senat, Neil Linden Mark Blair. It doesn't look as if we've got any other family members, but I'll just go straight to the bottom. Bond Street Registrars Limited. Deborah Jane Blair is also on the Blair Partnership LLP. And it looks as if that's... oh, there's a Crichton. And this is the Lumos Foundation now. There's also on that with J.K. Rowling, Roger Singleton. And then we get Temple Direct Limited, Temple Secretarial Limited, and all the usual suspects in the fraud. Temple Secretarial again, Pottermore. You know, those are jokes about the pots and the ashes, and the jokes that we made the other night. And then we talked about the Clarence thing that brought tears to my eyes.
Yes.
And you understand that the fact that someone who never has been born can now be lodged on the directory of a company. Now, have we got time, or shall we do a separate video?
I think we should carry on, George.
Okay, so I've gone down. If this is Tony Blair, his links to Pottermore take him into links with Mrs. Barbara Cahan. Finchley Road Boiler Rooms.
Yep.
Yeah, same ones that Mrs. Thatcher used.
That's
so it does not matter what your political affiliation is. If you're the Prime Minister, you're obligated to steal from the people. Otherwise you won't get the nod from the people that run the world, from Chipping Norton and the Washington equivalents. Yeah, it's not about democracy, it's not about integrity, it's not about honesty and working for your nation. It's about stealing from it. And you can do that even if you're the Prime Minister by just falsifying your ID. And there's no way that I can take a lawsuit against Michael Moore, because he's resigned already from those 80 companies, and it may not be him.
Yeah.
And I'm stressing that for you, Michael. You have no fear of meeting me because you're not obligated to tell the truth on the business register. And if Michael were to get his decency back and to begin to support his constituents by taking token attention of what they're saying to him, Michael could become a champion for the people by insisting that the passport is used when people register as directors.
It's that simple, George, isn't it?
It's easy to do. If you can do it to the citizens at border control, you can do it to the tyrants everywhere that the tyrants steal.
Of course.
So we should stop there, I think.
Okay, this is good.
But can you see the point? All it needs is some simple regulation, and Britain can have its prosperity back. We can have inflation removed entirely, because the profiteers are on multiple boards. If you look at the big six energy companies, there are hundreds, almost thousands of subsidiaries of those, and they're now globalized all across Europe and into Russia. The Gazprom contracts span the whole of Eastern Europe, and they take you into Russia, where the Rosneft project is still run in league with BP. And Gordon has told us that BP is still BP, and it's still basically Lonro, even years after they adopted the name changes. And the directors like Lord Patton, who's also had a heart attack, he mentioned a heart attack there about some other public figure that we had not heard about. Who was that?
Oh no, that was he had heart problems back in 2003. Tony Blair, of all people.
Oh yeah, that's what you were saying. Yeah, but Lord Patton had his heart attack on May the 17th, There has not been another bulletin on the internet, at least, on his health or his demise since May the 17th. But he's been dropped by the BBC as the boss, and he's been dropped by Oxford University as the boss, because things are getting very embarrassing for him. He's a profiteer par excellence for all of his career. Anyway, we better stop there, and I will talk to you next time about more of this identity fraud, and it's particularly prominent in a set of companies called Whittington.
Okay.
Yeah, have you heard of Whittington?
Yeah, Dick Whittington.
Yeah,
sure.
well, it's not spelt the same way. They've dropped the H.
Yeah.
And some of the virtual directors that I'm talking about appear on the Forbes and Debrett's listings.
Yeah.
You cannot find pictures of them anywhere on the internet, but they've probably changed that since I last reported it to you, when the tears were coming into my eyes.
Yeah.
So shall we stop there?
Okay, George. Fantastic. Okay.